"Need you to understand something, Kesha," said Richard Thornton, pointing his finger at the 2-year-old son of her who had been cleaning his mansion for 3 years. "This is not a daycare center. This is his home, and I will not tolerate you turning his workplace into a playground for this boy." The contempt in his voice when he said, "this boy," made Kesha's blood boil. But she kept her expression neutral. At 28, she had already learned that showing anger to rich white men would only make her situation worse. Her son Devon played quietly on the kitchen floor with some plastic pots, completely oblivious to the venom and the words directed at him. "Mr. Thornton," I explained that it was an emergency. "My nanny got sick, and I had no one to leave Devon with. It won't happen again." "It better not, because if it does, he's fired." Richard adjusted the cuff of his Italian silk shirt and smiled coldly. "There are dozens of women like you waiting for an opportunity to work in a house like his. Women who understand boundaries. Woman like you." The words echoed in Kesha's mind as she watched the man who employed her return to his mahogany and crystal office. Richard Thornton, heir to a fortune built on questionable government contracts, treated employees like disposable objects, especially when those employees didn't fit into his perfectly white and privileged worldview. Devon continued to play completely unaware of the tension. Kesha crouched down beside her son and whispered, "Mommy will fix this, sweetheart. I promise." What Richard didn't know was that Kesha Washington had a degree in business administration that he never bothered to find out about his. He also didn't know that she had worked for 5 years at an auditing firm before having Devon and being abandoned by the child's father. And he definitely had no idea that for the past 6 months she had been carefully documenting every racist conversation, every degrading comment, and every discriminatory attitude she witnessed in that mansion. As she cleaned the master bathroom, Kesha smiled for the first time that day. Richard thought he knew women like her, but he was about to discover that he had never met anyone quite like Kesha Washington. If you've ever been in a situation where someone completely underestimated you, subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple cleaning lady turned 3 years of silent humiliation into the sweetest revenge. The days following the incident with Devon turned into a silent psychological battle. Richard Thornton wasn't content with just forbidding Kesha from bringing her son back. He decided to turn every moment of her work into a lesson in humiliation. "Kesha, come here," he shouted from the main room one Thursday morning. When she arrived, she found Richard standing next to one of the imported leather armchairs, pointing to an almost imperceptible stain. "This wasn't here yesterday." "Mr. Thornton, I can check which product. I don't want explanations." He cut her off, adjusting his designer glasses. "I want you to understand that furniture like this costs more than his annual salary. Perhaps her family situation is affecting his concentration at work." Family situation. The euphemism he used to refer to the fact that she was a single black mother made Kesha discreetly clench her fists behind her back. Richard continued, "Some of my colleagues' wives have commented that they have maids who are much more focused, women who understand priorities." What Richard didn't know was that Kesha had grown up in a family where her grandmother, a domestic worker for 40 years, had taught her from an early age, "My daughter, he may try to break your dignity, but he can never break your intelligence. Remember every word. Document every injustice. Because one day you will use it all." That same week, Richard hosted a dinner for important clients. Kesha was to serve discreetly and clean as needed. During the event, she overheard Richard casually remark to his guests, "You know how it is. It's hard to find truly committed domestic help these days. Many of these people have other priorities." The guests laughed, understanding the coded message perfectly. Kesha continued to serve wine as if she hadn't heard anything, but mentally added that conversation to her growing collection of evidence. What really broke her patience happened the following week. Richard had an important business visitor, a Japanese investor interested in his real estate ventures. During lunch, Kesha served the meal with her usual efficiency. "Sorry for the delay," Richard said to the investor in English. "You know how hard it is to find competent maids when you have to hire certain communities? Diversity issues, government regulations. Sometimes we're forced to accept lower standards." Richard spoke as if Kesha were invisible, as if she couldn't understand fluent English, a language that she had mastered perfectly since college. The investor looked uncomfortable, but Richard continued. "Fortunately, she's well-trained and knows his place." At that moment, something changed definitively inside Kesha. It was no longer just about having a job or supporting Devon. It was about dignity, respect, and justice for all women like her, who swallowed daily humiliations from men who considered themselves superior just because they were born white and rich. That night, alone in his small apartment while Devon slept, Kesha opened his laptop, the same one he had used for 5 years as a financial analyst at the auditing firm Morrison & Associates before he became pregnant and saw his professional life fall apart when he was fired under fabricated pretexts. She had kept all the documents from that time, all the evidence of how she had been persecuted for reporting accounting irregularities at a client company. She knew exactly how powerful men manipulated systems to protect each other. But this time, it would be different. Kesha began to systematically research Thornton properties. What she discovered in the first few hours shocked her. $1 million contracts with city governments where promised housing projects for low-income families were never completed. Bids won under suspicious circumstances, strategic political donations that coincided perfectly with controversial zoning. Approvals. Richard Thornton wasn't just a prejudiced rich man. He was a white-collar criminal who used her influence to exploit the very communities he despised the most. For 3 weeks, Kesha maintained her normal routine of working during the day and investigating at night. After Devon went to sleep, she discreetly installed a recording app on his cell phone and began documenting every racist comment, every conversation about questionable business deals that Richard had in her presence. "Those people don't understand the value of a real opportunity," he said one Friday on the phone, discussing a delayed housing project while Kesha cleaned the office. "We give them subsidized housing, and she still complains about the quality. It's amazing how ungrateful some people are." Kesha continued to dust the furniture, but the small device in her apron pocket recorded every poisonous word. The turning point came when Richard welcomed his sister Victoria for lunch. Victoria, a socialite married to a senator, was even more venomous than her brother. "Richard, dear, do you really need to keep that maid? I have so many friends who could recommend people who are more suitable." "Why do you say that?" "Well, you know how these people are today. They bring their children. Tomorrow, half the neighborhood shows up here. It's only a matter of time before she feels too comfortable." Richard laughed. "You're right. Maybe it's time for a change." At that moment, Kesha realized that no matter how well she worked, or how respectful she was to people like Richard and Victoria, she would always be those people, always disposable, always less. But they had no idea that every word of contempt was being carefully filed away by the same woman who had exposed $15 million in corporate fraud at her previous company. Each new humiliation only strengthened something inside her that his oppressors couldn't see. A growing determination fueled not only by anger, but by technical knowledge he would never imagine a mere cleaning lady could possess. In the second week of August, Richard decided to take his humiliation game to a new level. During a routine visit from important clients of Thornton Properties, he called Kesha to serve coffee in the meeting room. "Gentlemen," he said to the three businessmen present, "I want to introduce you to a perfect example of what we were discussing about work standards in different demographics." He paused dramatically as Kesha served silently. "Kesha here has been working for me for 3 years. She gets an A in obedience, but you know how it is. Natural limitations of educational background." The clients looked uncomfortable, but Richard continued, "That's why our housing projects work so well. We know exactly the target audience and her actual capabilities." Kesha continued serving as if she hadn't heard, but the small recorder in her apron pocket captured every venomous syllable. This would be the 17th incriminating recording in her growing collection. What Richard didn't know was that same night, Kesha was on a video conference call with someone who knew his true capabilities better than anyone. "Kesha, do you have any idea how many federal laws this man broke in just today's conversation?" David Chun, his former supervisor at Morrison and Associates, analyzed the transcripts she had sent him. Racial discrimination in the workplace, creation of a hostile environment, possible civil rights violations. "David, it's not just about what he does to me. It's about the fraudulent projects. I got access to his computers when I was cleaning the office." Kesha shared her screen showing documents she had discreetly photographed. "Look at this. Affordable housing contracts where the government paid $5 million to build 200 units, but only 80 were actually built." David whistled softly. "That's large-scale embezzlement of federal funds." "Kesha, do you know what you're holding here? Enough evidence to send this man to prison for decades. I know exactly what I have. The question is, how do we use this so that he can never hurt anyone again?" Over the next few days, Kesha and David worked secretly to put together a devastating dossier. She continued her normal routine during the day, cleaning, serving, putting up with racist comments, but each new humiliation only strengthened her determination to see justice done. Richard, for his part, interpreted Kesha's submissive silence as confirmation of her superiority. On a particularly cruel Friday, he decided to test the limits. "Kesha," he called from the top of the marble staircase as she was cleaning the hall, "I need you to understand something important about hierarchy." She stopped what she was doing and looked up. "Yes, Mr. Thornton. Some of the maids here in the condominium are getting too big for their boots, making demands about wages and conditions. I want to make sure you're not being influenced by these dangerous ideas." "No, sir. I know exactly where he stands." Richard smiled, satisfied. "Good, because I have an important meeting on Monday with federal investors about our housing projects. I need everything to be impeccable. No distractions, no children, no problems. Do you understand?" "Perfectly, Mr. Thornton." What Richard didn't notice was the different gleam in Kesha's eyes when she said, "I know exactly where his place is." To he, it sounded like submission. To those who really knew Kesha Washington, it sounded like a promise. That night, she made a phone call that would change everything. Federal Prosecutor's Office, Financial Crimes Division, Prosecutor Janet Williams, speaking. "Prosecutor Williams, my name is Kesha Washington. I have evidence of federal fraud in housing contracts that I believe will be of interest to his. Ms. Washington, I need to see you in person. When can you come to my office?" "Monday afternoon works. But, prosecutor, there's something you need to know. The man behind all this is organizing a meeting with federal investors on Monday morning, if we want to catch him red-handed." Kesha heard Janet Williams sigh on the other end. "Ms. Washington, what exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that we give Mr. Richard Thornton exactly the kind of meeting he never expected to have. Over the weekend, Kesha prepared Devon to stay with a substitute nanny and reviewed every document, every recording, every piece of evidence she had collected during months of quiet investigation. Her background in financial management, which Richard had never bothered to discover, would finally be useful in a way he could never have imagined. "Mommy's going to work on Monday, sweetheart," she said to Devon on Sunday night, kissing his forehead. "But after Monday, our life is going to be very different." Devon, now 2.5, babbled an incomprehensible response, but his bright eyes seemed to understand that something important was about to happen. Across town, Richard Thornton reviewed his presentation to federal investors, completely confident that Monday would be another day of financial victories built on lies and exploitation. He had no idea that her simple cleaning lady had spent the weekend coordinating with federal prosecutors, government auditors, and investigative journalists, an operation that would turn his business meeting into the beginning of his most devastating public nightmare. Monday arrived with clear, sunny skies, as if even nature was conspiring to give Richard Thornton the most memorable day of her business life. He woke up at 6 in the morning, chose his best Armani suit, and reviewed one last time the inflated numbers he would present to federal investors. "Today will be historic," he said to himself in the mirror, adjusting his silk tie. "Another 50 million in housing contracts." Kesha arrived punctually at 7:30 as always. Richard barely glanced at her as she entered through the back door. "The meeting starts at 10 woo," he said coldly. "I want premium coffee served at 9:45. And Kesha," he paused dramatically, "behave appropriately. These are important men." "Of course, Mr. Thornton, I know exactly how to behave." Something in her tone made Richard look more closely, but Kesha had already headed for the kitchen with her usual efficiency. He shook his head and refocused on the preparations. At 9:40, the federal investors arrived. 3 men in smart suits entered through the front door: Thomas Bradley from the Federal Housing Department, Director Peterson from the Urban Development Agency, and a man Richard didn't recognize, a large black man who introduced himself only as Consultant Washington from the Justice Department. Richard greeted them all warmly, completely confident. "Gentlemen, welcome to Thornton Properties. I'm sure you'll be impressed with our proposal." "We're eager to see what you have to show us," said Peterson with a smile that Richard interpreted as approval, but which actually hid something very different. Kesha served coffee in fine china, moving silently around the room. Richard ignored her completely, focused on impressing the important visitors. As you can see in this presentation, Richard began clicking on the first slide. Thornton Properties has an exceptional track record in housing projects. We consistently deliver on time and on budget. Consultant Washington leafed through some papers and raised the first question. "Mr. Thornton, I see here that you received $5 million for 200 housing units in the Green Valley project, but the records show only 80 units completed. Can you explain?" Richard felt a slight discomfort, but kept smiling. "Oh yes, there were some necessary technical adjustments. Quality over quantity. You know how it is." "Technical adjustments," Peterson repeated, taking notes. "Interesting terminology." It was then that Kesha approached quietly and placed a thick folder on the conference table. "You asked him to bring the additional documents?" she said calmly to Consultant Washington. Richard looked confused. "What documents? I didn't ask for." "Mr. Thornton," Consultant Washington interrupted, opening the folder, "I believe there are some misunderstandings in her presentation that we need to clarify." The first page he pulled out was a copy of Richard's internal emails discussing how to maximize profits by reducing construction costs on projects for the poor. The second was a detailed spreadsheet showing where the embezzled millions had been spent, renovations to his own mansion, luxury cars, family vacations. What? How did you get this? Richard was visibly pale. Mr. Thornton Bradley said coldly, "Allow me to reintroduce our colleague. This is Federal Prosecutor Marcus Washington from the Financial Crimes Division, and the lady who served us coffee is Senior Analyst Kesha Washington, his lead consultant on housing fraud." Richard's world collapsed in that instant. Kesha Washington. The name echoed in his mind like an exploding bomb. He looked at the woman he had humiliated for years, who he had treated like trash, and saw for the first time who she really was. "Surprised, Mr. Thornton?" Kesha removed her apron, revealing a professional blazer underneath. "Or may I call you Richard, since we've spent so much time together all these years?" Richard tried to stand up, but Peterson gestured for him to sit back down. "Mr. Thornton, you have the right to remain silent." Wait. Richard was desperate. "This is a misunderstanding. Kesha, whoever you really are, we can work this out between us. You know, I've always respected his." Kesha laughed for the first time in 3 years inside that house. "Always respected me. Marcus, do you want to hear how his respected business partner really treated me?" She pulled out her cell phone and played one of the most recent recordings. Those people don't understand the value of a real opportunity. It's amazing how ungrateful some people are. Richard's voice echoed through the room, every racist word reproduced with crystal clarity. There were 23 similar recordings documenting 3 years of systematic racism. "My God," Bradley whispered his. "Did you really say that?" I was talking about, it's out of context." Context. Kesha placed another document on the table. "What context justifies you telling your sister that people like me always end up feeling too comfortable and need to be put in their place?" Richard looked around desperately. The 3 men watched her with a mixture of disgust and cold professionalism. His career, her reputation, her life, as she knew it, was imploding in real time. "Kesha, for God's sake, think about what you're doing. Work with me. We can come to an agreement." Agreement. Kesha approached the table. "Like the agreement you made with the families of Green Valley. You promised them decent homes and delivered shacks with leaks. No adequate heating in the winter. No basic safety infrastructure." Marcus Washington placed handcuffs on the table. "Richard Thornton, you are under arrest for federal fraud, embezzlement of public funds, systematic racial discrimination, and civil rights violations. You can't do this to me. Do you know his name? My family has had connections in this city for 4 generations." "Mr. Thornton," Kesha said, calmly putting away his documents, "I know exactly who you are. That's why I documented every crime, every racist word, every fraudulent scheme for 3 years, because men like you think they're untouchable." Richard tried one last desperate gambit. "Kesha, you have a son. Think of him. If you do this to him, you'll destroy your career too. No one will ever hire her again." Kesha smiled, a genuine smile of relief and victory. "Richard, my real career is just beginning. I've just been promoted to Director of the Federal Department's Housing Investigations Division. My first official case will be to ensure that every penny stolen from housing projects is returned to the communities he exploited." The color drained completely from Richard's face. "Director, you've always been. I've always been a financial analyst specializing in corporate fraud, infiltrating his scheme, every day cleaning his house, every humiliation he imposed on me, every racist comment, It all built the strongest federal case against housing corruption in the last decade. Marcus cuffed Richard as he muttered incoherently about lawyers and family connections. "Richard Thornton, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent, though I doubt you'll be able to after 3 years of being so communicative with my sister here." Her Richard looked between the two with growing horror. "Sister," Kesha confirmed, "and Prosecutor Marcus has been very patient listening to my weekly recordings about him during our family dinners." As Richard was led away in handcuffs, he shouted one last time, "This is a trap, a conspiracy. You can't do this to me." Kesha watched from the window as the federal police car disappeared down the Palm Line driveway. After 3 years of enduring daily humiliation, the moment had finally arrived that would make every second of suffering worthwhile. But true justice was yet to come because Kesha knew that taking down Richard was only the beginning of something much bigger. 3 months after Richard Thornton's arrest, the local news opened with a headline no one had predicted. Former cleaning lady becomes federal director, responsible for recovering $50 million in embezzled public housing funds. Kesha Washington adjusted her navy blue blazer as she walked through the corridors of the Federal Housing Department. In her hands, she carried the final report documenting how Richard's schemes had harmed more than 2,000 families in 5 different states. Director Washington greeted James Morrison, the same federal auditor who had been deceived by Richard for years. "What we discovered with his evidence goes far beyond what we imagined. It wasn't just Thornton properties. It was an entire network of businessmen exploiting housing programs." "How many have been indicted so far?" Kesha asked, entering his new office, where a photo of Devon at his kindergarten graduation decorated the desk. "1 businessman, 3 politicians, and 2 judges." Her recordings brought down a 20-year conspiracy. Across town, Richard Thornton waited on the cold bench of the minimum security federal penitentiary, where he would spend the next 12 years. His assets had been seized to compensate the victims. His company had gone bankrupt in weeks, and his sister Victoria had divorced the senator to try to save her own political career. "Thorn visitor!" the guard shouted. Richard dragged himself to the visiting room, expecting to see a lawyer. Instead, he saw a familiar face that made his stomach churn. David Chun, the analyst who had helped Kesha build the case against him. "I've come with news," David said, pushing a newspaper across the table. The headline showed a photo of Kesha receiving a Medal of Merit from the Secretary of Housing. Kesha recovered $47 million that you stole from disadvantaged communities. The Oaks money is being used to build real housing with decent standards. Richard read the article with growing horror. Kesha had not only destroyed his life, she had turned her destruction into hope for thousands of families he had exploited. "You know what else?" David smiled. "Her scholarship program uses some of the recovered money. Young people from poor communities can now study business and law at a university named after him." "What university?" "Richard Thornton University of Social Justice." She thought it appropriate to use his name to educate the very people you despise the most. Meanwhile, at the inauguration ceremony for the first housing complex built with the recovered funds, Kesha held Devon, now 3 years old, while hundreds of families applauded his arrival. "Is Mommy a hero?" Devon asked, impressed by all the celebration. "Mommy just did what was right, sweetheart." And she learned that sometimes we have to be patient and smart to make justice happen. Margaret Thompson, one of the residents who had lost her home because of Richard's schemes, approached with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Washington, I don't know how to thank you. My children finally have a real home. You don't have to thank me." Thank her own strength for not giving up when all seemed lost. In the audience, Rosa Martinez, who had lost her life savings in one of Richard's fraudulent housing projects, held the key to her new home. "I knew that God wouldn't forget us," she whispered to her daughter. "I just didn't know that He would send a warrior like Kesha." 6 months later, Kesha's story became a case study in universities across the country. Her strategy of strategic patience, meticulous documentation, and intelligent use of the legal system became a model for how to confront systemic injustices. Richard, for his part, discovered that the real prison was not the metal bars, but living with the knowledge that the woman he had despised had built a legacy of justice on top of his own ruins. The last letter Ka received from her was returned, unanswered. Some people simply don't deserve second chances, especially when they use the first one to cause so much suffering to others. Devon, now enrolled in a private school paid for with his mother's new salary, carried on his shoulders not only the pride of having a hero mother, but the lesson that intelligence and determination always overcome arrogance and prejudice. The IBD's best revenge really is the success that his enemies could never imagine. And when someone tries to belittle you because of her color, her origin, or her social status, remember he may control the present, but you control the future. If this story of reversal and justice touched his heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that sometimes the universe just needs a little help from us to make justice.